Everything you've been told about mental toughness is wrong. It's not about pushing harder when things get difficult. That's a recipe for breaking, not for building. Mental toughness isn't a pain tolerance. It's a regulation system. The ability to stay in a functional state when external pressure is trying to force you into a reactive one. The toughest people you know aren't the ones who feel nothing. They're the ones whose internal systems don't get hijacked by what's happening around them. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what mental toughness actually is at a systems level and why the people who build it aren't doing what most coaches tell you to do. Here's the thing that almost no one talks about. The way we've collectively defined mental toughness has actively prevented people from developing it. When you're running the wrong definition of a skill, you practice the wrong behaviors, get the wrong results, and then conclude that you're just not built for it. That's not a character failure, that's a systems failure, and it starts with a bad definition. The dominant cultural narrative around mental toughness goes something like this. The harder you push through pain, the stronger you become. Grit your teeth, silence your doubt, ignore your body, and keep going. You'll hear this framed as discipline. You'll hear it framed as toughness. What you rarely hear is what it actually produces in a nervous system operating under sustained pressure without recovery. What it produces is dysregulation, not strength. Your nervous system has a limited window within which it can perform well. Researchers and clinicians who work in performance psychology often refer to this as the window of tolerance, the zone in which you can think clearly, make decisions, regulate emotion, and stay present to what's actually happening. When you're inside that window, you're functional. When you get pushed outside of it, either through hyperarousal or through shutdown, your capacity drops. Reaction time slows. Judgment clouds. Emotional reactivity spikes. You stop responding to what's real and start reacting to threat signals your nervous system is generating internally. The person who just keeps pushing through that state isn't demonstrating toughness. They're demonstrating an inability to recognize what's happening to them, and they're accumulating a debt that will show up later, in performance crashes, in injury, in burnout, or in relationships that absorb the overflow. Real mental toughness is the ability to maintain access to that functional window under conditions designed to close it, and that is a trainable skill with identifiable components. Let's start with the first one. Pattern recognition under pressure. When your system begins moving toward dysregulation, there are physical and cognitive signals that precede the full shift. Heart rate changes. Breathing becomes shallower. Attention narrows in a specific way. Thought quality degrades in a recognizable pattern. The people who are genuinely resilient have learned to read those signals early, before the system tips over the edge. That early detection gives them options. They can adjust their breathing, shift their physical state, redirect attention, or make a tactical decision to slow things down. None of that is available to someone who has been trained to ignore their internal signals in the name of toughness. The second component is what you might call load management, knowing the difference between productive stress and accumulated overload. Stress that drives adaptation requires recovery. Without recovery, it just accumulates. The athlete who trains 7 days a week without rest doesn't become harder. They become fragile because the system never gets the opportunity to integrate the load it's been given. The same principle applies to cognitive and emotional stress. Toughness isn't built by continuous exposure to pressure without relief. It's built by cycles of pressure and recovery that gradually extend the range of what the system can handle. The people who build genuine resilience aren't the ones grinding through everything without pause. They're the ones who manage their recovery as seriously as they manage their effort. The third component is what some performance researchers describe as attentional flexibility. Under high pressure, the natural pull is to fixate on the threat, on the potential failure, on what's going wrong. That fixation is a survival mechanism. It made sense in contexts where the threat was immediate and physical. In most of the high-pressure situations modern humans face, that fixation is counterproductive. It narrows your perception at exactly the moment you need broader awareness. Genuinely resilient people have trained the ability to direct their attention deliberately, to pull it back from fixation and redirect it toward what's actually useful. That's not positivity. It's attentional discipline, and it's built through practice, not through willpower alone. Now here's where the psychology gets interesting, because this connects to why the traditional toughness narrative fails on its own terms. The classic instruction is to suppress what you're feeling and push through it. But emotional suppression doesn't make feelings disappear. It pushes them out of conscious awareness while they continue influencing behavior underneath the surface. Studies in affective science have consistently shown that suppression tends to increase physiological arousal while decreasing subjective awareness of that arousal. You feel less, but your body is carrying more. That gap between what you're consciously tracking and what your nervous system is actually doing is exactly where performance breaks down in unpredictable ways. The alternative isn't to become emotional or reactive. It's to develop what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to precisely identify what you're experiencing. When you can accurately name what's happening internally, you gain a degree of distance from it. The experience becomes something you're observing rather than something that's running you. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything about how you respond to pressure. What this means practically is that the training for mental toughness looks less like forcing yourself through painful experiences with your jaw set, and more like learning to stay present and accurate about your internal state while operating under external load. It's a perception skill as much as it is a performance skill. This also reframes the question of who gets to be mentally tough. The old model essentially suggested that some people are born with the capacity and others aren't. You either had grit or you didn't. What the research on nervous system regulation, on attention training, on emotional processing, and on stress physiology actually shows is that these are learnable capacities. They're not personality traits fixed at birth. They're developed through specific kinds of practice over time, and they're available to anyone willing to approach the skill honestly, rather than through a mythology that doesn't match the underlying biology. It's also worth pointing out that the mythology isn't neutral. It causes harm. When athletes, professionals, or anyone navigating sustained pressure believes that the correct response to struggling is to push harder and feel less, they often delay interventions that would actually help them. They read distress signals as weakness rather than information. They override recovery needs because rest feels like softness, and they end up in worse positions than they would have been if they'd had an accurate model to work with from the start. The goal of this video isn't to make pressure easier to avoid. Avoidance doesn't build anything. The goal is to give you a more accurate picture of what you're actually building when you're building resilience, so that the work you do actually moves you in the direction you're trying to go. Regulation under pressure is a trained output, not a personality trait, not a willpower score, not a reflection of how much pain you can tolerate before you complain about it. It comes from knowing what's happening in your system, managing your load intelligently, training your attention to stay flexible under stress, and processing rather than suppressing what you're experiencing emotionally. That's the system. And unlike the myth of toughness that tells you to feel less and push harder, this one actually holds up when you test it against reality. If this reframe shifted something for you, share it with someone who's been grinding through the wrong definition. And if you want to go further into how nervous system regulation connects to performance and decision-making under pressure, that's exactly what we cover in the next video. The link will be at the end of this one.